I'm going to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. We have one public speaker. You want to call the roll?
Vice Mayor Filseth. Mayor Niss. Here. Chair Scharf.
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka. 3 present. And Ms. Koo is out ill today also.
All right. So for items not on the agenda, we have Andrew Boone.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Boone. I live on Woodland Avenue, and I just wanted to bring to your attention a couple of streets in the city that could really use improvement for walking and bicycling. One of them, we have a design project to redesign a piece of El Camino Real. It's only a short segment from Stanford Avenue to Lambert Avenue, but the idea is to implement the vision of the Grand Boulevard Initiative and create a piece of El Camino Real that can safely be used by anybody, by people of all ages and abilities using any mode of transportation. And this project hasn't been brought to the City Council agenda at any time. I think it should be, given that, you know, one option for improving the street that other cities are considering is to replace the car parking that's on El Camino with separated bike paths, a type of infrastructure that's common in many cities. And given such a major change, I mean, we should be talking about this. I'd like to get your feedback at the council level, you know, what you think about such a change to the street. The other street is East Bayshore Road, where people walking and bicycling are forced to use the road where there used to be a pretty decent detour before the Bay Trail was closed. I don't know when it was closed, but it's closed for construction of the levees until the end of the year. And so East Bay Shore is the only way through kind of a regional connection, and the piece that's in Palo Alto is very dangerous to walk. The sidewalk doesn't even have a full width without poles in the way. It's very discouraging to ride a bicycle as well, and this is one of the streets that simply never got reviewed by this city. When this city reviewed the whole network of streets, made a nice bike plan, what does it say about East Bayshore? Nothing. You can't just have streets that go on year after year being hazardous for people that walk and bike and never do anything to fix it. Thank you.
All right. Short staff presentation by Dave, and then we'll hear from the public.
Okay. If I could just jump in, I know that we have a short window of time here. We brought a report on both the status of where we are on various infrastructure initiatives that the city has, and more specifically, though, bringing Dave Metz here with FM3 to discuss some of the next steps we could be taking as part of a survey that could play a role in how the council ultimately decides about what you may want to fund or how you may want to close any of the funding gaps that you have. There is a schedule in your staff report on page 6 that basically identifies what we're going to do here tonight, with the idea of following an initial survey. We would actually be coming back to Finance Committee for a refinement survey on April 17th, and a recommendation from the committee to ultimately go to the council for the council to approve the objectives of that refinement survey, and that survey being done in May. So I think this would be in many ways just a reacquaintance with the committee, with FM3 and Dave Metz, who've done polling work with us before, and talk a little bit about what we'd be attempting to achieve at this stage as part of your discussions about how you kind of want to ensure you are able to make progress on the infrastructure needs you've identified. So with that, Dave.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here, and it's a pleasure to resume our work with the City of Palo Alto. Our proposed research approach in this case mirrors the series of surveys that we did the last time the city was contemplating ways to increase funding for infrastructure. The thinking is to start with a survey that allows us to test the building blocks that might go into a ballot measure that would be placed before voters. Testing the relative importance that voters assign to a variety of specific projects and infrastructure improvements that might be funded. testing the viability of a range of funding mechanisms that might be used to generate dollars to fund those projects, and testing the durability of support for those mechanisms in the face of pro and con arguments specific to those mechanisms that might be put forward. With that data in hand, we would then be able to come back to you with some recommendations about how combinations of projects and finance mechanisms might be put together to form a measure that voters in the city would likely be enthusiastic about. And then the refinement survey that the city manager described could then be used to make sure that that package sort of met the standards that would be required to have a high likelihood of passage. This is the same sequence of research that we went through a couple of years ago, and we would also propose to ask a number of questions in the survey that we've asked in a series of surveys we've been doing for the city going back a decade, tracking people's perceptions of the quality of life, the performance of city government, and the condition of the city's infrastructure overall, so that we can determine whether those perceptions are remaining static or whether they've changed over time, and if so, what the implications of those shifting opinions might be for voters' willingness to support additional infrastructure funding. One modification to our research approach relative to what we've done in prior years is we're recommending conducting the survey through 3 different modes of outreach to voters. Calls on landline phones, calls on wireless phones, but also reaching out to voters online via email. We've been finding more and more as voters are severing their landline connections and becoming more comfortable with communicating online, that we are both more able to get a broad and representative sample and able to obtain it more cost effectively if we use all of those different modes to reach out to voters. The underlying sampling methodology is still the same. We still draw a random sample of voters who are likely to vote in November's election from the voter list. We simply add email as a way of reaching out to those voters in addition to reaching out by phone. And in a lot of other communities, most recently nearby in Mountain View, we found this to be a very effective way of broadening our sample and gathering even more public feedback without significant additional expense. So we've built that into the proposed approach that we've put before you this time.
All right, great. Anything further?
No?
All right, let's go to the public. All right, you'll each have, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You'll each have 3 minutes. Our first speaker is Ann Pinata.
My name is Ann Pianetta, and I'm a board member for the Friends of the Palo Alto Animal Shelter. As an organization, we've been trying for 5 years to upgrade and eventually replace the existing animal shelter. Pets in Need has offered to manage this facility, but the final decision as to whether or not they will be allowed to has been put on the back burner by the City Council. They have been patiently waiting for 3 years. Pets in Need is a very qualified organization for adoption of pets and educating the public on animals. They would be an excellent transition team to a better animal shelter. As I understand it, the animal shelter falls under the police department. One of the projects that is going forward is the building of a new public safety structure for them. Because the animal shelter is under the total auspices of the police department, it seems that the shelter expenses should be included in with the current project. After all, when the police take people to jail, and those people have dogs with them, they have to do something with the animals. They don't just let them go. So it makes sense to include an upgrade of the current shelter within this line item. At this time, Friends of the Palo Alto Animal Shelter just wants Pets in Need to be the authorized organization to run the shelter. It is in desperate need of improvements, as nothing has been done for a very long time. Now animals can't even be spayed or neutered, which brings in a certain amount of income to Palo Alto. I'm asking you please to include the animal shelter in the council infrastructure plan. Surely the care of animals is higher on this list of improvements than parking lots. Thank you.
David Cole, to be followed by James Palaster.
Hello, my name is David Cole. I'm here with Carbon Free Palo Alto. I hope you had a chance to read our report and analysis of the staff report. I'd like to add a few numbers here. For each Cal Avenue garage space, new parking space, not for the added new space, it's $124,000. For the downtown garage, it's $112,000. That's each new space. This has to be a new record for the cost of parking. But the good news is that there are some solutions here that are much less expensive and have been proven many times over. Stanford is one. They have a great track record with their TDM. A study cited in the paper that we presented showed that UCSD used TDM to avoid building 13 garages. Another cited study is one in New Jersey where they used Uber services to avoid building garages. So there's a lot of different things we can do. If you're going to be polling people about the potential funding measures, it's very important that we cast a wide net and include both business tax and a special assessment tax. The special assessment has been used in the past to fund these types of projects, so we shouldn't ignore these things. So there are some good options here. If you are committed to the garages, a future headline might read, Council votes for $83 million boondoggle, breaks budget, and embraces the past. If you're committed to solving the problem, keeping your promise with the Cal Lab community, the comp plan, and the SIP, a headline might read, Palo Alto leads with an innovative parking and congestion solution, saving $60 million while reaffirming their commitment to addressing climate change and quality of life. I hope you will please consider our paper. Thank you.
James Pellester, to be followed by Libby Lundgren.
Greetings, council members, and thanks for the opportunity to talk. I just want to address the upcoming budget issues that are coming up. And from our end of it, I'll be talking about the Arrestadero Corridor project, something I've been aware of and involved in for many years now. I am a resident of, used to be Barron Park, now the Orchards, and I've got students that are now at Gunn High School and Terman Middle School. So I've seen the entire evolution of this project and looked at how it's come from something that was supposed to help bring students to school a lot safer and avoid the influx of traffic that would come with students that can't make it to school safely by biking and walking. And it is, up to this point, done a great job of that. I've got kids that enjoy walking and biking to school as much as they can, along with their friends. But the completion of this project is what we really would like to see. There are still some more improvements to be done, including infrastructure stuff that will happen on the Arrestadero corridor. And the funding for that, which has been authorized, and the project is supposed to be completed, in lieu of what's going on with the other projects that are coming up, I would like you to consider prioritizing that a little bit higher than those, especially something like a garage, which has just been coming up lately, instead of something that has evolved over a decade, okay? And it's been refined to the point where it is ready to go into its final phases. So in that case, I would like you to consider strongly prioritizing the Charleston Arrestadero Corridor project over some of the other projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Libby Lundgren, to be followed by Penny Ellison.
Hi. I'm with the PTA for the Safe Routes to School, and I just wanted to also show some support for the bike and pedestrian plans that are on the budget plan right now. Just wanted to kind of have you guys keep in mind trying to fund the things that are going to help the most people and for the most cost-effective way. I think a lot of these plans, relative to some of the other projects, don't cost as much money and can really help a lot of people for a long time. So just keep that.
Thank you. Penny Ellison, to be followed by Paul Goldstein.
You all have some very knotty problems to solve here, and I want to start by thanking you for doing this important work for us. I am here to ask you to support funding the 3 bike pedestrian transportation plan projects in the infrastructure budget. I'm sure you aren't surprised to hear. I support the Highway 101 bike pedestrian intersection and the bike pedestrian boulevard neighborhood traffic safety projects implementation and Charleston Arrestadero corridor plan. And I want to say thank you to council for the unanimous support they've previously given to these projects, which all work together to create a complete street network for people of all ages and abilities who bike, walk, ride, transit, and drive. As I was thinking about the whole budget, I started thinking about how do we weigh, what the worthy projects are. And so some of the things that drove my analysis were how the projects aligned with the comprehensive plan goals, policies, and programs, particularly policies that relate to key issues, including traffic congestion management and grade separation that council's identified this year as priorities. And you may or may not be aware that the Charleston Arostadero plan is, in fact, sort of preparation for grade separation. Once the train preemption is eliminated, automobile capacity will be increased on Charleston, which will draw more regional traffic to the corridor. So those safety improvements are going to become increasingly important for school commuting students who use that road. And then I started thinking about previous commitments, the long-term projects. This list looks kind of like that closet that you put your unfinished projects in. We've got, the bike bridge that's at least a little more than a decade old as far as I know. There's Charleston Arostadero, 15 years old. Multiple projects in there. The public safety building, I think, might be 20 years old now, right? Or longer, right. And these are all projects that are urgently needed. And then finally, I wanted to think about possible additional revenue sources. I did notice that missing from the list of potential revenue sources in the staff report there's no business license tax or business tax of any kind. And a big chunk of the money that's, earmarked, or the project money that is in this budget would really serve businesses, would provide parking for local businesses. And there also is not a plan to price automobile parking for users. So I'm wondering how businesses can think about helping to fund projects that serve them. And then also I just wanted to express concern about the constrained survey schedule. Is that me? I don't know how this works. All right, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Paul Goldstein, to be followed by Sophie Alexis.
Hello, I'm Paul Goldstein. As many of you know, I'm a long-term resident of Palo Alto. I served as the Palo Alto representative to the VTA and County Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and I'm also a longtime member of the Palo Alto Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. I urge you to continue making progress on the bicycle and pedestrian projects on your infrastructure plan. I certainly recognize that there are very important projects on this list. The public safety building is long overdue, and the parking problems in the city need to be addressed. But this should not be at the expense of the bicycle and pedestrian projects. If we are to realize our goals in our comprehensive plan and to have a community where people of all ages can walk and bike safely, we need to provide this infrastructure. In addition, as city staff has noted in its reports, the parking deficit in our commercial areas can be managed with smaller garages and with programs that are cheaper than the garages. I'd like to highlight a couple of things in the bicycle and pedestrian category. Improvements in the Charleston-Arostadero corridor have been in the works for over 15 years. This is an important connector to many schools. The crossing of El Camino greatly improves bicycle safety. The concept line was unanimously approved by City Council in September of 2015. Similarly, the bicycle bridge over 101 is a long-promised connector that is regionally important. After all the false starts on this project, it is past time to get it built. Together, these projects have spent $5.8 million to date, and there is grant funding for an additional $10.9 million. As a member of the VTA BPAC, I know how competitive these grant funds are, and these are very good projects, and that's why they've been getting the funding. These projects have been promised to our community for over 15 years. It would be very demoralizing and would undermine faith in our processes, including the comp plan process, for the council to go back on its promises to complete these projects. As a further thought, given that the parking deficit appears mainly around the noon hour, I wonder if variable time of day pricing strategies could be an appropriate source of revenue for some of these garages. Thank you.
All right, we had one, oh, Sophie, and then we have one other speaker. Sophie Alexis. So I'm going to cut off taking speakers after these two. So if you have it, you got 30 seconds to get it in. Okay.
My name is Sophie. I'm a sophomore at Gunn High School, and I got hit by a car. 4 months ago, I was biking across the El Camino-Rostadero intersection, and I had an event later, which I didn't want to be late for, so I rushed across as when I saw the light was green. It changed halfway through, and a car hit me. Well, I was very late for my event. I got away with a bruised knee and a demolished bike. But the next kid who gets hit because of these safety issues might not be so lucky, or the next. This issue not only concerns my safety, but the safety of my friends and my classmates. Please, help create an intersection where you don't need luck or special biking skills to pass safely. Addressing the safety issues that this intersection poses would be a major step forward. Not only it would be a major step forward in ensuring a safe bike ride to school for all of my peers. The Rostadero Corridor project would ultimately be beneficial for my entire community. Please move forward on these improvements.
Thank you. All right, I may have just gotten a little bit out of order here, but so Michael Monier, to be followed by Nina Bell.
I'm operating under a slight disadvantage. I forgot my hearing aids, so if I shout at you, just wince or something. I'm here, I live at 646 Fairmead. I'm here to reiterate my oft-repeated support for the Charleston-Rastadero plan. It's actually working pretty well for those of us in our landlocked neighborhood. We can get in and out. Peak traffic times are what they are. Everybody knows about them. And fundamentally, the issue for me of prioritizing expenditures comes down to safety issues. I've been quite concerned about that, having raised my children there, having to try to get myself scuttling across the road to get to Walgreens and back on foot, and watching what goes on at peak hours. For me, the issue is indeed safety, and if you've read my letter, you know kind of what sparked that off in 2003. So I'm hoping you will prioritize the expenditures required to complete the plan without further delay. It's been over 10 years, and everybody's tired. Thank you very much.
All right, Nina Bell.
Thank you. This is a bit impromptu, and I appreciate what everyone has said about bicycling. I also am in the same neighborhood as Michael Morier, which is a landlocked neighborhood. And yes, the striping has helped immeasurably, but the original goal, which was to have safety for all users of the corridor, is not yet accomplished until the hardscape is in place. If we don't have our proper egress holding pockets to turn left, if we don't have the little raised median to block cars from jumping through, it's still not safe. And where we live, we have bicyclists who ride the wrong way, students. And so in the design, beautifully designed in there, is a section for children to ride the wrong way, just that short distance to get to Terman. So I deeply, deeply ask you to finish this project, 15 years in the making, unanimous all along the way. And just as a final word, as a craftsperson, I have a closet full of unfinished projects. It would be lovely to see a project finished and feel the pride of having something entirely done. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Melanie Lim, to be followed by Evan Lurie.
Hi, I'm Melanie Liu with Divest Palo Alto and Alliance in Solidarity with Standing Rock. I'm here just to remind you that we're still actively looking for divestment from fossil fuels from the city of Palo Alto. And I want to highlight what's happened in LA. The city has moved to divest. They have, and that's $8 billion from fossil fuels and the banks that fund and bank on climate change. And they have also implemented the strongest social responsibility investment screen in the country. It's a 30-point screen. I'm going to share that with you guys by email later. And I hope that we can develop a social responsibility investment policy in this next upcoming cycle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Evan Lurie, our last speaker.
Good evening, Council, members of the public. I typically, before I say anything, I like to say that I love Palo Alto, and I've lived here for a long time. But tonight I have to disclose that I really don't love Palo Alto as much as I used to. The growth in this town has been astronomical. The real estate values have gone through the roof. The business growth has been unprecedented and completely unchecked. And as a consequence, we are losing sight of what our core values used to be. I don't stand here taking any satisfaction in sharing that conclusion, and I don't think I'm alone. Before this committee tonight, I appreciate is a very naughty question. That's naughty with a K-N. Resources are always too scarce with regard to how much any government institution wants to achieve. Given that, there must be a mechanism for prioritizing the projects on the table. Some of them, as you know, having heard from prior speakers, have been there for over a decade. I sincerely hope that tonight's meeting follows the precedent unanimously set by all prior bodies to support entirely the Charleston-Arastradero corridor. It was designed as a complete project. It needs to be finished as a complete project. As has been noted, it is essential for safety. It is essential preparation for grade separation. And we have to have the hardscape in place. The only other thing I would add is that for other remaining projects for which this committee is convened to allocate funds, a parking garage can only anticipate further growth. There is a movement afoot in this town to ensure that any future growth is regulated. I think that also means that the people who are going to benefit from that future investment must be asked to defray the costs. If that requires specific and targeted taxes or increases in licenses, I think that must be taken under consideration by this council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we return to the council. So I think I'll just start on this a little bit. So tonight, the primary thing on the agenda is to give direction to Dave Metz and, I forget the name of the firm, Metz, FM3. So that's primarily what we'll be doing. I did want to just briefly just outline this a little bit. So first of all, I think we can do all of the projects on the list. This started back in 2010. There was a colleague's memo from, believe it or not, the Finance Committee, this is this committee, to the rest of council, which said, you know, our infrastructure needs to be done, we need to get it going, and we came up with a list of projects. And that project is in the staff report. It's the Charleston-Arastradero thing that so many of you have spoken to. I fully agree we need to finish that. I don't think there's any doubt that we need to move forward and finish that. We talked about doing a public safety building. We talked about doing a parking garage. downtown and a parking garage on California Avenue. We talked about 2 fire stations, and we talked about a bike bridge, and we talked about a little money for Bixby Park. Did I miss anything? I think I got most of them. So that was the infrastructure plan. It's been the infrastructure plan for 2010. When we went out for the infrastructure, we decided the best way to fund it, frankly, was a TOT tax. A TOT tax is primarily a tax on business, frankly. You know, most of the people who stay in the hotels during the week are, frankly, business people who come from out of town and support the locals here. So the plan is actually to use a business tax to do that. TOT, since 2010, has been funding our infrastructure plan. And that's been the council direction and the council policy. So when we went out to the public, the question was, what should the TOT tax be? There was a disagreement on council. I advocated for going up for a higher TOT because I believed we would have cost overruns and we would have cost escalation. I lost that vote on a 5-4 vote, at which point we went for a 2% increase in the TOT rather than a 3% increase in the TOT. So where it stands now is we have a need to complete this infrastructure plan, and I believe that we should move forward and poll and move forward with the TOT tax, in which point we can fund all of the items on the infrastructure plan and not have to cut any of them and not have to, and keep our promises to the voters that we frankly made back when we went to the public and asked them for that. So I think that's really important. And the other thing I think people should realize is that out of the amount on the downtown parking garage, one of the things that the city manager's office has pointed out, or whoever did the staff report, is that there will probably likely be an additional 2.8 million in parking in lieu funds that are paid to the downtown. If my math is correct, and it's roughly means there's about, with that extra 2.8, there should roughly be somewhere between $8 and $10 million in that fund. I think it's 10. Now, if we don't build the downtown parking garage, we'd have to actually give that $10 million back to the developers. The reason why there's $10 million in that fund is that we have allowed people, rightly or wrongly, we have allowed people to pay into the in lieu fund rather than building a parking space. So that $10 million represents parking spaces that have already been promised that were not built. So I believe we need to complete that promise as well, build a downtown parking garage and get that done. And if you have been following and everything, parking in California Avenue is a nightmare. It's spilling out into the neighborhoods. There are fights about adding 10 permit parking spaces into the Evergreen neighborhood. And I completely understand where the Evergreen neighborhood is coming from. I'm just saying that parking is critical in those areas. And in fact, we have, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we have 1,100 people parking in our neighborhoods surrounding who are buying permits. So by building the parking garages, I think you will support retail, you will support getting cars out of the neighborhoods, and we will not necessarily be bringing more cars downtown. Cars are already downtown. I also wanted to say that when we talk about a business license tax, I think there's really 3 things going on here. So we need to fund our infrastructure, and that's the infrastructure plan I just outlined. The second thing we need to fund is our Parks Master Plan Fund and buy more parkland. We are critically short of the amount of parkland per person as the Palo Alto has grown. And there's an opportunity, we need to have a fund to be able to do that. We also need to figure out how to solve the issue with the animal shelter. That's a $10 to $15 million issue. We need to fund that. I believe we should fund the second phase of the Junior Museum and Zoo. And then there are other things that we may want to fund that relate to parks, recreation, and things. And council's going to have to decide what that looks like. And what I think we're looking at there, when you look at all these taxes, is a 1/4 cent sales tax. Now, a 1/4 cent sales tax, I don't know the numbers. That's paid partly by Palo Alto residents. And frankly, when we're talking about parks and recreation, some of that should be funded by Palo Alto residents. And since we are lucky enough to have Stanford Shopping Center and be, frankly, a destination retail, and also the Stanford Business Park, believe it or not, produces as much sales tax from a business point of view as all of downtown does, you are also having the businesses fund a significant portion of our Parks and Rec. The other thing you should know about the 1/4 cent sales tax idea is is that if we don't take it first, somebody else, another government entity, if they put that on the ballot and get it first, it will go to them. It's a race to whoever gets it first and gets it. So I believe it's time to get that and dedicate that money towards parks and funding our Parks Master Plan. Now, in the long run, the other leg of this taxing that we need to solve is we need to solve the grade separation issue. We are very behind on where we are on grade separations. We, at the end of the year, have set a goal, which is an ambitious goal, and there are a number of people who think we may be moving too fast. But if we're moving too fast on that, we will never get it done. So we need to figure out a preferred alternative for what grade separations look like in Palo Alto. At which point, once we know what our preferred alternative is, we can then make those projects shovel-ready. Once we know what that looks like, we can then decide how best to fund it. We can't go to the voters and say, let's fund grade separations before we know how much it's going to cost. And it varies wildly. VTA at one end thinks that we should be spending $150 million per grade separation. Some of the alternatives we're looking at, i.e. what's called the mini trench down in South Palo Alto, may be upwards of $500 or $600 million. So depending on what we look at as a community, we then have to decide how we'd fund that. The best way to probably fund that would be a business tax. And so, but that's probably not till 22 or maybe 20 if you could get it together. And so that's really the universe of things of how I'm thinking about this, and I think a lot of people on council are thinking about how we fund all of the needs that we have. So with that said, I was going to open it up to my colleagues to talk about it, and then we should talk to you about, I've sort of outlined to you of how I sort of see this going. But anyway, so do you have anything you want to add?
Actually, one brief question. If I don't see this anywhere, how many responses do you guys expect to see on the
600.
600?
We're shooting for 600, yeah.
Okay. And sort of at random across the city?
Yes, a random sample of likely voters.
Okay.
I'll add something in general, and hi, Dave, it's nice to see you. As I recall, over the last 2 or 3 years, several polls have been done, not just yours, other polls have been done. They tend to be very consistent, which is reassuring. I'm going to presume that within this, aside from the fact that we're talking primarily about what we are going to fund, you'll include those usual general questions that you do. You might just give us a sample, because when we poll, we're not simply saying, how about the Arrestadero corridor? What about the bike bridge? What about this? I mean, you're really also looking at other parts of information that you'd like to have for our community.
That's right. The surveys are designed to serve a specific information need for city government at the time that we do them, but there's also a range of questions we ask. They're just helpful as general management tools for you to understand how people feel about the quality of life in the community, what they see as the major issues facing it, and their overall evaluation of the performance of city government. So those questions that we have been steadily asking over time for you in past surveys, will carry those forward and give you updated data on all of those as well.
And how many polls have you done for us now, roughly?
I think going back to the bond measures we tested in '07, probably 6 or 7 polls over that period of time.
So, and I'm bringing that up because I think that in today's world, people say, oh, polls, polls don't count anymore, and so forth. I think they do, and I think they give a good picture, in addition of what support might be for our budgetary needs, but also what else is going on in the community. And I think that's equally important when we go out and poll. Thanks.
Anything else? So Dave, do you need, you have a list of projects in the staff report. Are you planning on polling on individual projects or no?
We have some questions where we'll be asking people to rate the importance of general categories of spending and also some more specific projects as well.
So I think there's 2 other areas which we may, as a council, want to spend money. We may want to have a dedicated funding source out of the TOT for TMA. we've talked about expanding the TMA on a more of a citywide basis, taking it to California Avenue. So I think that's an area which we may. And then the only other project on here that I think that we might, and there may be other ones that eventually come up, but the Roth building has sat there for 25 years, something
20.
like that.
Just 20.
Yeah, it's the History Museum building / Roth building. We may want to complete that, renovate it, and fix it up. It's right on Heritage Park, looks nice. I mean, it could be a real asset to the community. My guess is that would go into the second bucket with the Parks and Rec type stuff, Junior Museum and that. So I think those are the only other two projects I can think of off the top of my head that we may want to poll on. I don't know if anyone else has anything at this preliminary stage.
Frankly, I think you've done a good job of summing up everything that's happened during most of your tenure on the council.
I know, right? It was like a novel, you know, right? All right, with that, I guess I would just move that we ask FM3 to go ahead and poll.
Second it.
Oh, there was one other thing, didn't you? Yes, and I'll just add into the motion that maybe staff could also come back with a more granular explanation or provide it to Dave, helpful, on the Parks Master Plan projects. Because I think it just says Parks Master, so maybe you could just work together and, you know, get a
We can
sense,
do
and
that.
eventually come back to us with,
Yeah.
you know, an outline of what
Yeah,
this would be.
so I think it's important to restate that this is an initial poll, again, that will inform this refinement survey that we will do, that will again come back to the committee. Dave will be able to share the sort of findings, see how that this tracks with prior polls and those sorts of things as it relates to the attitude of the community. And then you'll have the opportunity to, again, weigh in more specifically on some of the strategic angles you would want to pursue. And I would just add, for folks who are concerned at all, are we moving fast? The fact of the matter is, in order to even be eligible to have something on the November 18 ballot, we've got to have the council actually make the ballot question decisions before the end of June. So for us to be able to do this preliminary work before we come back to the committee and the council, we can't be any slower than we are going right now if you're going to have that opportunity to hit this election. And I think that that's in the council's and the community's interest to at least have that choice to make that decision. Thanks.
Sure.
I hope everybody's aware of sort of the need to move expeditiously on this, right? You know, I think the way we do this is that council and staff need to figure out and design the right way forward on this. And the poll is going to shed light on this, okay? But it's not the plan itself. We're not going to run the city by poll, okay? Right? Council and staff are going to develop the plan. And first and foremost, I think we want the poll to tell us if we're making a huge mistake somewhere, right? I don't think that's going to be the case, but I think that's it. It's going to inform and shed light on what we want to do, not define specifically what we're going to do.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any other final comments, or?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think so. I mean, I think the staff report lays out the challenges. You spoke to the fact that, you know, they're within reach of being able to be solved, both even with some existing revenue streams we have, and then if there's potential to tap into others, then to be able to expand to really deal with the range of infrastructure needs that the city has. And you talked about future issues related to grade separation and future ballot measures, so we'll be back like at Rail Committee and other formats for that. But I think we're ready to go, and we'll be back here right now targeted April 17th, I think is the date we would be coming back with the results from this poll, and then your discussion and action on the next step.
All right. And I want to thank the public for coming out and speaking. We really appreciate your input.
And thank Mayor
Yes.
Niss for sitting
Mayor
in.
Niss, I got Mayor Niss
for
out of
getting
bed
us
for
to
this.
have a quorum.
He made some promises. I don't know who sounds worse though, me or Jim.
Anyway, meeting adjourned.